All right, I think we can get started today. Hi, welcome to today's webinar, introducing Global Food Partners Animal Welfare Benchmark Criteria for Layer Hen Standards. And my name is Hannah. I am the Scientific Officer at Global Food Partners. And I know many of you listening or GFP and the work that we do. But for those of you who don't, I'll just give a very brief background. So Global Food Partners is a multinational science-based consultancy firm. And our mission is to ensure a sustainable and economically viable transition to best practice cage-free egg production in Asia. And our aim is to create a kind of cage-free ecosystem in the region. So we work on both sides of the supply chain. On one side, we support corporates and food businesses to develop cage-free roadmaps and implement cage-free sourcing policies. And on the other side, we work with producers, providing technical support and support to help them transition to cage-free production systems and improve current practices on farm. So as part of GFP's science and extension team, I mainly work with producers on the producer side, helping to develop training materials and provide consultation services for cage-free farms. And I also work on our cage-free model farm and training center projects that we have in the region. And I also was involved in developing our animal welfare benchmark criteria and benchmark program, which we'll talk about today. And with me today is Global Food Partners Senior Management for Corporate Engagement, Dawn Neo, and Dawn will jump in at the end to help with the Q&A session. And also have one of our program associates based in China, Bailey, with us as well today. So I'll be doing a presentation for about just under half an hour today, and then we'll have a Q&A session at the end. So there's a Q&A box at the bottom right of your screen, and please feel free to type in your questions as we go through the presentation or anytime during the Q&A session. And I know we have lots of people joining from different countries today, so feel free to type your question in your preferred language. So it might be Japanese or Chinese, and we can respond to you directly after the webinar. So I'm going to start by giving a bit of a background to why we developed our animal welfare benchmark criteria, and then I'll explain how this document might be useful for you and your business or organization. And looking at the attendees today, we have people joining, as I said, from many different regions and people from different backgrounds. So we have some people from the food, retail and hospitality sector, some people from certification scheme or standards owners, also from some NGOs and advocacy groups, and also I think some academics are joining as well. So a great mix of people joining today. So welcome to you all. So for those involved in the food and hospitality business, some of you may already have an existing cage-free egg commitment or sourcing code that you're in the process of implementing. Or you may be at the beginning of your cage-free journey and just starting to think about developing a policy. Either way, the animal welfare benchmark criteria that we've developed can support you in your journey and ensure that your business's cage-free sourcing requirements align with good animal welfare practices. So the transition to cage-free production systems is more complex than simply removing the cage. It is important to ensure the cage-free eggs that you buy come from farms that are managed to good welfare standards, and that the hens are living a good life where they're healthy, looked after, and able to express all their natural behaviours. In many regions around the world, there is a lack of legislation and general understanding of what cage-free actually means. And this is something we hear often when we're working with food businesses and other stakeholders throughout Asia. And for those of you involved in standards development or certification of cage-free farms, this session's also going to be relevant for you today. And I'll talk a little bit about our benchmark program and how you can apply to join this program and be formally evaluated against our criteria. And I'll also talk about the benefits of joining this program for your organization, but also for the farms that you work with and the farms that you certify. And GFP also works very closely with egg producers and other industry stakeholders, including universities, government departments, and industry groups. And as mentioned before, we're hearing from a variety of stakeholders that there's this need for an improved understanding and guidance on fundamental elements of cage-free production. So our benchmark and what I'm going to talk about today will also be relevant for you. And before I move on, I just wanted to highlight that today won't be a very technical focused webinar. We won't be going through the benchmark criteria one by one or going into the science behind the specific requirements that we've included in the benchmark. But our team is always happy to chat about that and about the technical aspects. So please reach out to us anytime, and I'll provide our contact details at the end of the presentation. And we'd be happy to get on a call and talk about the more technical side of things one-on-one. So why did we develop the benchmark criteria and why are we talking about this benchmark approach? So there are numerous cage-free standards and certification schemes that currently exist around the world, and new standards are being developed all the time. Across Asia, for example, over the past few years, we've seen cage-free standards being developed in China, Thailand, Japan, the Philippines, and Taiwan. Additionally, there's also some global certification schemes that are active in the region, such as RSPCA Assured and Certified Humane. And while there are many benefits to certification, such as traceability, marketing opportunities, and brand differentiation, this increasing number and variability between different standards can be confusing for businesses, for retailers, governments, producers, and also for the consumer. And this confusion can cause delays in implementation of cage-free policies, essentially causing a roadblock and making the transition to sustainable cage-free supply chains more difficult. And this lack of clarity about what a good minimum standard or cage-free sourcing policy is has created an empty space in the cage-free conversation. And we aim to fill this space by taking this benchmark approach. So it's important to clarify here that our benchmark criteria, this document we have developed, is not a standard. We didn't develop the document to compete with existing cage-free standards or certification schemes. And Global Food Partners is not a certification body, and we won't be using the document to accredit or certify individual egg farms. But rather, the main purpose of our animal welfare benchmark criteria is to provide this kind of reference point to evaluate the various standards that already exist. So any benchmark approach first involves defining a set of criteria. And in our case, this criteria covers the minimum requirements for the care and management of layer hens that should be included in any good cage-free standard or code. And I'll talk a little bit more about the content of the criteria in the next couple of slides. So once we've defined this set of criteria, we then use that to evaluate the different standards. and provide recognition to those that meet or exceed this minimum level of welfare. So as I mentioned earlier, I won't go through the criteria in detail today, but I just wanted to give a very broad overview in the next couple of slides. So the criteria are grouped into these 8 categories, and they cover topics such as the provision of feed and water, environmental conditions such as lighting and ventilation, animal handling, the provision of litter, nest boxes, perches, environmental enrichment, routine husbandry practices, euthanasia practices, and biosecurity, just to kind of give you an idea of what the content involves. And this section here, section 8, relates to the operation and management of the organisation responsible for the standard or scheme. And this is a really important aspect. We can't just focus on the performance or content of the standards. It's also important to consider the operational aspects and how the standards are actually implemented and assessed on farm. So some basic requirements in this section 8 here include things like having a regular review of the standards, product traceability, and requirements for an on-farm audit at least once per year. And currently, the scope of our benchmark criteria really focuses on the laying phase. So we don't currently include any hatchery or pullet rearing or off-farm slaughter operations, but in future, we may look to expand the criteria in future revisions. So the criteria are categorized as either requirements, and they're listed under blue headings, or recommendations, which are listed under orange headings. And in total, we have 207 criterion. So 80 of these are requirements listed under the blue, and they should be seen as this really basic minimum level of care. And we classify them as they must be included in the cage-free standard. So it's a requirement that they're listed. The other 127 criteria under the recommendations heading, we've included these to basically build upon that minimum level of care, and they're more like best practices or improvements that are likely to improve the welfare of the hens. And they can be seen more as a kind of guidance or aspirational criteria to include in future for any standard or scheme that can't currently meet them. So this is just an example of the criteria that we have included in our document relating to perches. So perching is a natural behaviour for layer hens. They like to roost or sleep on perches at night that provides a feeling of safety for them. And providing perches also helps reduce the risk of abnormal behaviours and fearfulness in the hens. And it can also help improve their muscle and bone health. So for a cage-free standard or sourcing code to meet the criteria we have relating to perches, the standard would need to ensure that hens have access to the perches at all times, that they have a minimum of 15 centimetres of perch space per hen, and that the perches are designed and positioned so that the hens can perch comfortably and safely. So that's just kind of an example of the wording and the details that are included in our benchmark criteria. And for context, I'll just briefly mention a bit about the development process. So when developing our benchmark criteria, our team referred to various resources and took into consideration guidance from animal welfare frameworks. We also looked at existing animal welfare standards for layer hens around the world. and also considered the feasibility of meeting certain criteria in different regions of the world, because we wanted this benchmark to really apply globally. We released a draft of the benchmark criteria for public consultation mid last year, where we received feedback from various stakeholders, the majority being standards or certification scheme owners, and also animal welfare organizations. And after reviewing this feedback, we then finalized the document, and it is now available on our website. So you can scan the QR code there, but I'll also share the link and the QR code again at the end of the presentation. So quickly coming back to this image, we can see that while standard A meets some of the criteria, doesn't meet all the requirements needed to reach this reference point or this threshold. And as a result, we would say standard A does not align with GFP's benchmark criteria. On the other hand, we have standards B, C, and D that do align with our benchmark criteria. And I just wanted to point out that with the benchmark approach that we are going to be taking with our program, we won't be ranking or scoring certification schemes or standards against each other. Our main goal is to generally just recognize a standard as meeting our benchmark or not meeting our benchmark. So what I've just explained is one way in which our benchmark criteria can be used, and that is as a tool for evaluating the layer hen standards and certification schemes. And tied in with this is an opportunity to both recognize and add value to these existing standards that meet this minimum welfare requirements for the hens. And the benchmark criteria can also be used as a guidance document for egg producers, food businesses, certification schemes or governments or other stakeholders when they're developing or updating procedures or sourcing codes, standards, or codes of practice. And it can also be used as a tool to measure progress and commitment to improving cage-free production practices or sourcing requirements. So as I showed in the previous slide, it provides this general reference point to what good animal welfare in cage-free systems encompasses. So you as a stakeholder can actually use this document to benchmark yourself against the criteria at various points in your cage-free journey and report changes and improvements over time. So how can the benchmark help you? So if you're a food business, adopting a simple cage-free sourcing policy is a great first step. And our benchmark can help you take the next steps to ensure you and your suppliers who are producing these cage-free eggs adhere to good welfare practices. The benchmark criteria can help guide you and your procurement teams when you need to develop your own cage-free sourcing code. And again, it can be used as this reference point when engaging with your suppliers or your customers. If you require second or third party auditing of your suppliers, the benchmark can help you evaluate the cage-free standard or scheme that's available in your country or region, so you can make an informed choice. And it can help you identify areas for future improvement to your cage-free policy or sourcing code. And for certification schemes or standards owners, we welcome you to participate in our benchmark program. So our benchmark program is how we will formally evaluate certification schemes and their standards against our criteria. So by participating in our program, schemes which align with our criteria and meet our benchmark are publicly recognised by the program and able to make specific claims themselves. So, for example, we are a participant in Global Food Partners Benchmark Program, and our scheme and standards align with their animal welfare benchmark criteria. So the objectives of our benchmark program are to, one, provide recognition, as I've said, to those schemes and standards that align with our criteria, but we also want to provide a pathway for improvement for those that don't currently align and want to open the door to work with them to improve and meet this minimum benchmark threshold. And another benefit for joining our benchmark program is improved market access, and that is through our Impact Incentives program. And our involvement in this Impact Incentives program was one of the main drivers behind the development of our benchmark criteria. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail today, but essentially the Impact Incentives program is a book and claim, like, online credit trading system. And I know at first glance this chart might look a bit overwhelming, but hopefully you can take away a few key components of the Impact Incentives program, which I'll quickly explain. So cage-free farms here that are certified by a scheme, a welfare scheme that meets our benchmark criteria, are eligible to trade these cage-free credits on an online platform. So for any volume of cage-free eggs that are sold in the market as conventional caged eggs, the farmer can actually get a premium for selling these eggs by through the sale of cage-free credits on the platform. And these cage-free credits are then purchased by brands or food businesses, and the premium and the money goes back to the farmer. So the farmer benefits from this additional premium for their cage-free eggs, and the brands who purchase these cage-free credits, they can use these credits to advance their cage-free commitment and show their support for cage-free production, particularly in regions where the physical sourcing of large volumes of cage-free egg can be an issue, as the supply chains are not yet fully developed. So without this Impact Incentives program here, the situation would be that a farmer would be forced to sell their cage-free eggs at conventional prices and wouldn't be getting a premium for their product. So that's kind of a very broad overview, just to give everyone a bit of background. And just wanted to show on the next couple of slides the basic summary of our benchmark program evaluation process. So the main thing I wanted to show you here was just highlighting some of the main steps involved, including a self-assessment by the standards owner or the certification scheme, and the evaluation that would be done by an independent expert, and the coordination of the whole process by Global Food Partners Benchmark Program Manager. There will also be an evaluation committee that will review the initial decision made by this evaluator. And following good benchmarking practices, there'll also be a public consultation period where people can submit feedback on the result of the evaluation. So again, that's kind of a very, very quick summary of the evaluation process. If you would like to know more about the benchmark program, please reach out to us. I'll add the contact details at the end, as I said, and we're very happy to provide more information on the application and the evaluation process and start that discussion with you. For other stakeholders, such as egg producers, if you're looking to become certified, not sure which standards or scheme to follow, The benchmark criteria can help you choose a scheme that meets good welfare practices and also aligns with consumer expectations, and thus can be seen as a kind of a risk reduction tool to future-proof your cage-free egg business. And it can also be used as a guidance document to help improve practices on the ground. And as I just explained a few minutes ago, there's also this increased market opportunity for cage-free farms that are certified by a scheme that meets our benchmark through this cage-free impact incentives program. So to summarize the presentation today, Global Food Partners Animal Welfare Benchmark Criteria is a useful tool for evaluating cage-free standards. It's a guidance document that can help with decision-making. It can be used as a tool to measure improvements in cage-free policies or practices over time, and can also benefit your business in terms of risk reduction and improved market access. So you can download the Animal Welfare Benchmark Criteria document from our website, www.globalfoodpartners.com. So if you scroll to the bottom of the homepage, you'll see the link in the bottom right under the benchmark criteria. You can also scan the QR code here. And I'll be emailing everyone with the link to today's webinar recording as well. So I'll include the benchmark criteria download link there as well. So if you don't have time to scan or get these details, we'll be sending them through via email after the webinar. So whether you're a food business looking for support to develop your cage-free sourcing requirements or general support for implementing your cage-free policy in Asia, our team is here to help. And if you're a standards owner or a certification scheme and would like to be benchmarked, please get in touch and we'd love to talk to you about getting the process started. And anyone else here today, if you'd like to know more information about the benchmark criteria, our benchmark program, or any of Global Food Partners' other projects working towards developing a cage-free ecosystem in Asia, we'd also love to hear from you. So please reach out. And yeah, we would love to continue the conversation. So that's the end of the presentation today. So I'll just repeat for anyone who joined a bit later, we're going to have a Q&A session. So you can type your questions in the Q&A box on the right-hand side. And your preferred language is okay if you want to type in Japanese or Chinese or any other language. And we can come back to your questions after the webinar.
Thank you, Hannah, for the presentation. And the Q&A session is now open. So I will be reading out questions. Feel free to type in questions. The first one from an anonymous attendee is that, would we be circulating this PowerPoint afterwards? Hannah?
Sure. Sorry. Thanks, Dawn. Yes, we'll be sending around a link to the webinar, and if you're interested in the PowerPoint slides, we could also send you a PDF version of today's presentation. Sure.
And also we'll be sending a link to the actual benchmark. Somebody else by the name of Momo Suto asked, can this be used as a common standard here in Asia?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I kind of referenced at the beginning of the presentation, the benchmark is not a standard itself, and we're not we're not trying to, add another standard into the mix of the ones that are already in existence. And I understand that sometimes it can be a bit confusing, the difference between a standard and a benchmark and the details within. So rather than having a standard ourselves, we're basically trying to create this minimum reference point or minimum set of criteria that standards should cover. So as I said, we have about 80 criteria that are requirements, and rather than putting out our own standard, we would be asking standards, or whether it's a government standard or a corporate standard or a farm standard themselves, to work towards meeting those minimum 80 requirements.
That's right. The benchmark is really a tool to help all the stakeholders understand or to meet a set of minimum criteria. I hope that answers your question. There's another one. What if there's no certification scheme available in the country where I'm at? Or what if the scheme that is currently available in my country, for example, a government scheme, doesn't meet the minimum criteria in the benchmark? What do I do? Can I still buy eggs from farms that don't meet the minimum standard?
Sorry, I was just muted. Yeah, that's a really great question. So if there's no scheme or standard available in your region that currently meets the benchmark, I guess it's a really good opportunity to use the benchmark as a tool to engage with different stakeholders and start that conversation, whether that's with government or another organisation, to develop some standards that align with this good minimum welfare practices, to try and help address that gap in your region. If you're a food business and this is the scenario you're facing, the benchmark criteria can be used to help you develop your own simple sourcing criteria in the absence of any legislation or welfare scheme that already exists. And our corporate team at GFP can help you with this. I know the criteria document can seem a little bit technical for those who don't have a big background, but we're very much here to help you work through that if needed and go through the key elements that we're trying to encompass with this benchmark criteria and the key welfare areas that need to be covered when you're talking about cage-free hens in Asia.
That's right. So we're always here to help. So feel free to reach out to us to help develop your own sourcing standard or for advice on different standards. So I have another question here from somebody who submitted to us this earlier. What if my suppliers in my country cannot afford to get certified to a third-party standard? How can this benchmark help?
Yeah, that's another very good question, and we understand that some farms might not be able to afford to be certified, or there is the barrier for attaining third-party certification for some farms. And in these instances, while the farms might not be eligible for impact incentives right away, the benchmark can still be used as this reference point that I keep mentioning. So even though the farm might not be certified, you can use the criteria we've developed to kind of do an informal exercise or assessment whether they meet good welfare practices. And you can use that to help inform your decision about whether to source from that farm or whether you're comfortable sourcing from the farm who meets these practices.
I have another question here. Will this benchmark criteria be translated to other languages?
So currently, the benchmark criteria is only available in English. However, if there's a regional standard or certification scheme that's in another language, we can still benchmark that through translation. So we'll still be able to look at different standards in different languages under this program we're talking about.
Thank you. Another question here. How much do you think customers are aware of these certifications? Or what's the best possible way to educate them, to tell them the importance of animal welfare? And this is a question from Mr. Wahu.
Yeah, Dawn, do you have a response for this one?
So for consumer awareness, I think it's always a work in progress when it comes to certain Asian countries. Definitely, in our work, we also partner with companies and retailers and think of different marketing schemes to build consumer awareness. Definitely being certified, it's a very good way to start that conversation, to start that awareness, because when consumers see this new logo on a product in a supermarket, they start asking questions, they start researching, and that's a very good way to start that conversation as well, on top of what's already being done in this region. I hope that answers your question. Another one from Japan, Ms. Maho Cavalier. Does the benchmark also include the parts of production, such as pullet rearing, slaughtering, and transportation?
Yeah, great question. Thanks, Maho. So at the moment, the benchmark criteria doesn't include pullet rearing. It doesn't include off-farm slaughter. There are some criteria related to slaughter if it's done on-farm, on the premises. And we do have some covering transportation. So we did get quite a lot of feedback on this in our public consultation, that a lot of stakeholders wanted to see the benchmark expand beyond just the laying phase and include things like pullet rearing and hatcheries and abattoirs. And we definitely want to include these in future. I guess it just really expanded the scope of the project first off, and we decided to focus on the laying phase first. But you know, at GFP, we're always talking about not only it's important about the laying phase, but the pullet phase, and matching the rearing farm as much as possible to the laying farm, making sure one, specifically it's cage free, which we are finding that can be quite a big hurdle as well for this cage free transition, is finding cage free pullet rearing farms in the region. But also things that are consistent across all these different practices. So good handling and good stock personship and good training and competency of everyone involved in managing the birds at all of these different stages is really important. So yeah, in future, I would love to kind of expand the criteria to all of these different practices and life stages of the layer hen.
Thank you for your question. Somebody else wants to know, there's an existing standard that's active in my country. Let's call it X. How do I know whether this standard meets your benchmark or not? And when will I know?
Yeah, a great question. So, you know, we're hosting this webinar today to kind of kickstart the conversation, to introduce our benchmark criteria document that we've developed, and also introduce the benchmark program and how we want to start evaluating different standards and schemes. So at present, we haven't, you know, formally got any results to publish or provide you. So we invite, as I said, invite schemes and standard owners to get in contact with us, because we really want to start the process as soon as possible. And if you're a food business, we can provide the results to you once we've gone through that formal benchmarking process. But, you know, in the meantime as well, there's other ways that we can continue the conversation and talk about developing your own standards, or how this benchmark criteria can be used to do a check or an exercise against the existing standards that are out there outside of our formal evaluation benchmark program. So there's a variety of ways that we'd be able to use the document and engage with you. So yeah, please reach out. We're more than happy to find out more about your situation and how we can help.
Thank you. I have a question from a certification scheme that has a standard. And this person said, most points in our standard do meet the benchmark criteria and the minimum criteria that you have, but there are 2 points that are short of the minimum. What do I do now that you have this benchmark published?
Yeah, another really great question. So I guess maybe I can explain a little bit more about the benchmark program and the evaluation process. So as I mentioned, we've grouped things into either a requirement. So there's 80 criteria that are requirements and 127 which are recommendations. And ultimately, we would encourage everyone to try and to consider meeting all of those criteria, both the requirements and the recommendations. But in terms of the benchmark program and the evaluation process, we'll mainly be focusing on those 80 requirements that we said set this minimum level. And we've actually developed a whole bunch of documents, like a program manual, application forms, and guidance on all of these processes, which we'll have available shortly and can send you directly. And we'll also be having them up on our website that goes through, it's quite transparent and public about all these processes.
That's great. Yeah, thank you. Any other questions from the floor? Oh, here's another one. Somebody asked, where is this standard based on, or what is it based on? How did you develop this criteria or benchmark?
Yeah, another great question. So I had a quick slide that went through our annual development process. And as I mentioned, the initial draft was developed by our science and extension team. We're using kind of consensus information or best practices that were gathered from the various welfare standards that are out there. And in the document itself, we actually provide a list and the links to all the different standards and the references that we used when we were developing the criteria. And so that was the kind of basis of our draft. And then when we did the public consultation, we did get some really great feedback from a variety of stakeholders. So we got feedback on things like the structure of the document, the phrasing of some of the criteria, the content of some of the criteria, and where that welfare level was set. So we took all that feedback on board and kind of had a more internal discussion about where this level is to be set. We also consulted some guidance on best practice benchmarking. There's an organization called ISIL that develop a lot of documentations about improving sustainability standards, and they've got really good guidance on how benchmarks should be developed and the processes involved and things you need to consider. And things like stakeholder engagement is something we did and we followed. Looking at the policies of the program and how the benchmark program will be governed. And things like that. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. A very interesting question here. Somebody asked, we often approach producers, but sometimes there are things we can't explain in detail. Is it possible that we collaborate with GFP and take a joint approach to talk to producers to explain things to them so that they understand?
Yeah, so I'm not sure, what background that question is coming from. If you're, a food business and talking to your suppliers, or an NGO or an advocacy group talking to farmers who are currently farming in cages and you're looking to help them transition. But yeah, definitely GFP can help you with those discussions. So as I mentioned earlier, we have a core team at GFP spread out across the region, and we work both on the corporate side of things, but also do a lot of work with producers on the ground. So yes, please reach out to us. We'd love to know more about the situation and how we can help you engage with producers.
Definitely. One more question from this time a food company. my company already has a sourcing code for cage-free eggs. Can I join the benchmark, or can my company sourcing code be benchmarked?
Yeah, so as I've kind of alluded to in the presentation, there's a variety of ways that we can use our benchmark criteria to evaluate different standards and schemes. So if we're talking about the impact incentives program and the ability to trade credits, that is really limited to third-party certification schemes. But if you're a food business and you have a sourcing code and you want to be benchmarked, yes, we can definitely engage with you on that and do kind of a benchmarking exercise outside of the formal program. And also, yeah, help guide you through the document and you know, where you're at and where you might want to go. And yeah, Dawn in our corporate team, you'll definitely be able to arrange that. So please reach out. It'd be fantastic to get in touch.
Yeah, definitely. The purpose of this document is really, we hope that this will be a tool that's useful for the industry, whether you're a food company, hotel company, or producer, or existing standard organization, or NGO. We hope that it can be a tool that's useful and to start a conversation with all of you. Any other questions before we close this session? I see a question here written in another language, and we will be able to get it translated and then get back to you after the webinar. So feel free to give us questions in other languages as well, if that's what you're comfortable with, and we will get back to you via email.
Thanks, Dawn. Yes, I saw that question. I think it was in Bahasa Indonesia, and I wish my my language translation skills were better that I could answer that, but we'll come back to your question directly by email. So thank you.
Thank you so much. So if there are no other questions, we're good to close for now, but please feel free to, if something comes up to you later on, please feel free to reach out to us by email, and we'll be happy to address that.
Great, thanks, Dawn. So yeah, if there's no more questions, I think we can wrap up today's session. So thank you very much for joining and participating. Some really great questions from everyone, and I hope today gave you just a little bit of an introduction to kind of this benchmark approach, why we've developed this document, and how it might be helpful for you. And as I've said multiple times, please reach out to us. We're eager to help, you know, whether you're a food business or a producer or a standards owner. And we love talking about our work in the region. So yes, thank you for joining. We'll be in contact shortly with a link to the webinar recording today. And that will also have a link to download our benchmark criteria document. And for those questions that we unfortunately couldn't get to, we'll be in touch as well and respond to those.
Thank you very much for joining us. Hope you have a good rest of your day.